Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So here's a deck profile for you guys today. This time it's on a budget version of the new Charmer deck. So the Charmer structure deck came out a couple days ago, maybe Thursday if you have your own locals. But anyway, I figured I'd buy 3 structure decks and put together a deck for you guys with using cards only within the structure deck. And well, figured I'd just show you what I came up with. So yeah, this will be kind of fun. So starting off with the main deck, it's 40 cards. I'm playing 3 copies of Familiar Possessed Alsa. So all the Familiar Possessed monsters, they special summon themselves from hand or deck by sending the face-up version of their original selves. Now, of course, you're not going to be doing that with this deck. You generally just bring them out fairly easily with some of the spells and trap cards. And yeah, kind of go from there. Give me 1 sec, you guys. Okay, so anyway, sorry about that. I didn't have my door closed all the way. But moving on, playing 1 copy of Hita. Like I said, they all do the same. I think the reason you want to run Alsa really is because you're mostly running Earth monsters, and I feel like it's the most important one. So, but yeah, Hita, definitely my second, probably like my main favorite actually, but my second favorite would actually be Win. So yeah, Win, again, they all do the same thing. So yeah, like they just go in tangent with one another. One area, might as well just play all 4 of them, right? So, but like I said, Alsa is probably going to be the one you really want to play out of all of them the most. Next, for the new support, I'm running Awakening of the Possessed Nefarious Fiend, or Nefarious Archfiend, I should say. So, the way this card comes out is simply by sending either a face-up spellcaster and a 1 face-up level 4 or lower Earth monster you control. Now, this is not hard to do by any means. And funny enough, you can special summon this card from your hand or your deck as well. So, yeah, it's a little weird. But anyway, when this card is special summoned, by its own effect, you can special summon 1 level 4 or lower monster from your grave, but its effects are negated. Now, this is fine, especially if you're going to play like a more competitive build. You can do some Ring 4 shenanigans with this, or just go do some link climbing, basically. And also, if this card is sent from the field to the grave, you can add 1 spiritual Earth Art or any possessed spell or trap from your deck to your hand. So it's actually good to search things out. Next, 1 copy of Awakening of the Possessed Greater Inari Fire. So basically it just does the exact same thing, only instead of sending an Earth monster, you send a Fire monster. And when it's special summoned, you inflict damage to your opponent equal to the original attack of 1 monster they control, and it's of your choice. So it's pretty nice, but it's probably not as good as the Earth one, honestly. So yeah, this one's probably going to be like, maybe something you want to run on the side deck if you decide to go a more competitive route. It's really up to you. Moving on, 2 copies of Gigabyte, probably the best one of the familiars. So basically the way this card works is that if you control a spellcaster monster, you can special summon this card literally for free from your hand. And when this card is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 monster with 1500 attack and 200 defense from your deck. So it's pretty good just to bring out more extender pieces, basically. 1 Inari Fires, like all the familiars summon themselves literally for free as long as you control a spellcaster. So once per turn during your next standby phase, after this face-up card is on the field was destroyed by a card effect, unfortunately it's specific on card effects. It would have been better by battle, which is why I'm only running the 1. You can special summon this card back from the grave, so it brings itself back almost every turn. Next, 1 Ranryu. So if you control a spellcaster, yeah, you special summon this card from your hand. And if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect as well and sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 monster with 1500 attack and 200 defense in your graveyard except Ranryu and special summon it. And last but not least, 1 Nefarious Archfiend, Eater of Nefariousness. Definitely not bad, but it's not as great as people often think. So if you control, or once per turn during your opponent's end phase, if this card is in your graveyard, you can target 1 face-up monster you control, destroy it, and if you do, special summon this card. So the problem with this card is like, yeah, it's supposed to go in tangent with the other familiars, but the problem is it can be a potential -1 if your opponent disrupts it somehow. Like, let's say they have a DD Crow, you pop one of your monsters, and then they DD Crow this card out of your graveyard. Yeah, you just like lost more value. So like that's why I felt like it's not as good as the other ones. So yeah, I think 1 is perfectly fine regardless, but still, like I wouldn't overly rely on this card whatsoever. So that's pretty much it for the Charmers and the actual familiars themselves. Now moving on to my starter. 3 copies of Fairy Tail Luna, probably the best starter in the entire deck. It literally searches out all your familiar possessed monsters as long as they have 1850 attack points. And also, this card is really good for disruption. It basically acts as a compulsory evacuation device. So like it bounces itself back and one monster your opponent controls. Of course, they can negate it by sending a monster from their deck or extra deck to the grave of the same name, but you generally force your opponent out of his resources this way. So Fairy Tale Luna is not to be underestimated. And of course, I'm playing 2 copies of Witchcrafter Golem Aruru. This card is also pretty good for a disruption piece. It's basically a hand trap in its own right. Basically, you can target a spellcaster you control and one monster your opponent controls. Bounce both this. Well, actually, no. I'm sorry, I'm reading it wrong. You can target one card your opponent controls or one Witchcrafter spell and trap in your grave, or Witchcrafter spell, I'm sorry, in your grave. Special summon this card, and if you do, return the targeted card to the hand. So it's a good way like to bounce back one of your opponent's monsters and special summon this card with a really big body, by the way. She's got 2,000 attack points, so she's huge. That's also pretty good for disruption. So my bad. I thought it was I thought it bounced 2 monsters back rather than 1, but yeah, I misread that. My apologies. And for the only other hand trap I'm playing is 3 copies of Effect Veiler, since, you know, it is in the structure deck. I mean, it's basically a staple at this point, so why not? And Effect Veiler is just so much better in this format now because Called by the Grave is still at 1. So we'll just have to wait and see if Konami eventually decides to bring that card back to 3. So, and honestly, I still don't like that, but whatever. Moving on to spells, 3 Spirit Charmers. This is actually a really awesome card. So you discard 1 card, take 2 cards from your deck with different attributes with one another that are Charmer monsters, familiar possessed monsters, and or a spell or possessed spell or trap. Add one of them to your hand and then you set the other. So it's actually pretty good just to get some added value off of this. So you discard for the price of 2, but honestly that's not too bad. Like I said, you get to add 1 to your hand and you just essentially get to set any spell or trap you want. So, and it actually goes pretty well in tangent with this card, Awakening of the Possessed. Monsters you control gain 300 attack points for each different attribute you control. Charmer and familiar possessed monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. Of a spellcaster with 1850 original attack is normal or special summoned to your side of the field, you can draw 1 card. And that's actually pretty good because like you just get to essentially draw cards each turn. And there is a way to kind of abuse this during your opponent's turn too, which we'll get to later on. Moving on, 2 copies of Grand Spiritual Art Ichijin. I was thinking of 3, but I was like, you know what, 2 is perfectly fine. It's searchable, so I'm not too worried about it. Negate your opponent's first effect that resolves each turn while you control a spellcaster with 1,500 defense points. So this goes with your familiar possessed. During your main phase, you can reveal 1 spellcaster from your hand, and if you do, add 1 monster with the same attribute, but with 1,500 attack and 200 defense from your deck to your hand, and if you do, shuffle back the revealed card back into the deck. So it's basically a trade-off. But what's interesting to know this is that you can essentially add one of your actual familiars, like Gigabyte, for example, add it to your hand, and then you could just special summon if you already control a spellcaster monster. That's actually kind of good, actually. Like, it's a really good effect, and yeah, if you know how to properly use it, it gets nuts. Moving on, 1 copy of Secret Village. Like I said, the other 2, they're searchable. So you'll be running 1 terraforming. And yeah, that's generally it. You know, for any spell heavy decks that don't have spellcasters, it's a good way to just lock them out. Alright, so moving on to traps now. 3 copies of Possessed Partnerships, which is actually also an amazing card. So you can special summon 1 spellcaster with 1,500 defense from your hand or grave in attack mode or face down defense position. Then, if you control monsters with 2 or more different attributes, you can destroy 1 face-up card on the field. Of course, the card has to be face-up, but think about it this way. Let's say you were up against let's say you were dealing with Floodgates. This is actually a really good way to deal with Floodgates. So, like, yeah, it's just, like, a good way to deal with stuff like that. It's also pretty good for disruption, too, so think about it that way, too. You can banish this card from your grave and then target 1 possessed continuous spell or trap in your grave. Place it face-up on the field. So that's actually really good. It doesn't set it again. It just basically activates it back in face-up mode. So, yeah, it's really nice. Next, 2 copies of Unpossessed. This one has a similar effect of the spell card, but here's what it reads. Charmer monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle. So if you have this and the continuous spell, your opponent can't really destroy them by battle or card effects. So they'll have to like use non-destruction removal to get rid of them. And yeah, it gets pretty nuts. If a familiar possessed monster you control attacks an opponent's monster, it gains 800 attack points during damage calculation only. That's perfectly fine. If a monster or monsters you control is destroyed by battle or card effect while this card is already face up in your spell and trap card zone, You can special summon one spellcaster with 1500 defense from your deck, whose attribute is different from at least one of those destroyed monsters' original attributes on the field. So pretty good, and it also brings them out in face-up attack or face-down defense. So not too bad. Like I said, these are actually pretty good cards overall. Now this is a little different than most builds you'll see using just a $30 budget. I'm actually running 3 copies of Solemn Warning. I figured it's just good for stun purposes, simply because, I mean, like, nobody ever sees it coming, and most people often forget that this card is actually back at 3. So Solemn Warning, definitely not a bad way to, you know, get things rolling, especially if you're going first. Yeah, it gets pretty good. And of course, last but not least, 1 copy of Metaverse. This is just another way to search out your field spells or just directly activate them into the field. So yeah, definitely an amazing card. All right, moving on to the side deck. And you'd be surprised, yes, you can actually make a side deck thanks to this structure deck, because that's what I love about structure decks now. There's always enough cards to make an actual side deck. So starting off with 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. So this is just basically going second cards. Triple Twin Twisters. Triple Book of Eclipse. You know, why not? 2 more copies of Secret Village of Spellcasters, just in case if I actually need any more. The 1 Raigeki, I mean, it is limited and it's a reprint, so yeah. Honestly, it would have been fine if they made this a super, or as a common, but it's fine as a super. The super actually does look nice still, so why not? And last but not least, 3 copies of D-Barrier. So yeah, depending on the right matchup, this card can actually come in clutch whenever you need it to. So yeah, well, that's pretty much it for the budget $30 Charmer deck. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll be back soon to give you guys a real competitive version of this deck. And till then, I'll catch you guys next time.